Last week we completed chapter 4, but I left with a question of, we know that in chapter 3, God tells Eli that because he sinned, there's going to be a terrible event that happens. And he tells them also that his children will, because of he hasn't stopped his children, that he's going to cut off his line from continuing to serve in the tabernacle. And he will know that those things are going to happen because there'll be a terrible thing, and both his sons will die on the same day, which of course is what happens in chapter 4. And we left with a question: where do we see that God's telling or promise to Eli that his line will be cut off as serving in the tabernacle? When does that actually take place? And I promised you a little bit of a guided tour through the Bible in this instance. So first of all, and I also mentioned this, I believe, last time, that it's not as clear. I mean, Eli, we know, is the high priest in the tabernacle, but at the same time, he functions as a judge. And the kind of role that we know of the high priest, both based upon what Aaron was doing, and how we know that from the 5 books of Moses, and on the other hand, the information we know more about later on in the Second Temple, it seems a little vague exactly what the role of the high priest is during this time. And what we do see is, rather than one high priest, very often we see pairs of priests, and we don't know which of them are the high priests, but these are the priests that are somehow connected to the king. So if we, for example, and this we see both in especially with David. Okay, when we talk about King David, we talk about he has connections with some of these priests, and they seem to come in pairs. So if we look at 2 Samuel chapter 15. Right? Okay, chapter 15, verse 29. And here we have David talking to, it's actually during this time where he is returning the ark, carrying the Ark of the Covenant. Anyway, and we have him with these various priests. So who do we have? In verse 24, we have he's mentioning Tzadok. Tzadok appeared with all the Levites carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God, and they set down the Ark of God until all the people had finished marching out of the city. Eviatar also came up. But the king said to Tzadok, and then he gives him whatever. And then it goes on to, in verse 27, the king said to the priest Tzadok, do you understand? You return to the safety of the city with your 2 sons, your own son Ahimaaz and Eviatar's son Jonathan. So we have here two priests that seem to share some kind of function, Tzadok and Eviatar, and they have children, Ahimaaz and Jonathan. Okay, so we see those two. And indeed, in verse 29, we see that the pair of them, Tzadok and Abiatar, brought the Ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they stayed there. Okay, so we have these 2 guys, Tzadok and Abiatar, and the question is, who are they? And are they from the children of Eli? And who actually where do we see the lineage of Eli? So for this, we go to the book of Chronicles, 1 Chronicles. Always helps us in these kinds of situations. Although sometimes, and I must say it's confusing, we'll see this here as well, because in the book of Chronicles, very often we have generations, the same names repeat over and over again. And it's particularly in a given lineage, the same name, and actually it's very possible that they have the same custom that we have today in Jewish culture. We very often have a custom to name a baby after a deceased parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, or whatever. And in fact, that's what Ashkenazi Jews do. Sephardi Jews very often name a child after a living parent or grandparent or great-grandparent. So in both cases, you see that would have the repetition of certain names. Okay, so if you look at 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verses 35 to 38. Here we have a listing of the sons of Aaron. Okay, these are the sons of Aaron: his son Eleazar, his son Phinehas, his son Avishua, his son Buki, his son Uzi, his son. In other words, this is going down. We're starting with Eleazar, and we're going down the lineage of Eleazar. And look at 38. We have his son Sadok, his son Achimaaz. Here we go. We have, these are the priests that we have mentioned with King David, Sadok and his son Achimaaz. So we know that Sadok and Achimaaz are descendants from Eleazar. Okay, now, on the other hand, who's Evyatar? And here we can get help from chapter, let's take a look at chapter 24. We're still in First Chronicles. Chapter 24, verse 3. Okay. And here we see, look at verse 3. We're talking about David having these two different, we already met them already. We have Sadok and Achimelech. Okay. It could be that Achimelech is, I'm not exactly sure if he's the same as Achimaaz or somebody else, but let's take a look and see who these people are. He divides them up among their tasks. In other words, they each, both Sadok and Achimelech, Sadok is from the lineage of Eliezer. Achimelech is from the lineage of Itamar. Okay, and they both have jobs. David is dividing up the jobs among them. And it says in verse 4, the sons of Eliezer turned out to be more numerous by male heads than the sons of Itamar. So they divided the sons of Eliezer into 16 chiefs of clans, the sons of Itamar to 8 clans. They divided them by lot, both on an equal footing, since they were all sanctuary officers and officers of God, the sons of Eliezer and the sons of Itamar. Okay, so here we have it like it's equally. Shemaiah, the son of Nathaniel, the scribe, was of the Levites, registered them under the eye of the king, the officers, and Sadok, the priest, and Achimelech, son of Evyatar, and the chiefs of clans of the priests and Levites, one clan taken for Eliezer, one each taken for Itamar. So we have here, okay, we have here mentioned, again, we find Evyatar. So we have Evyatar, we learned here. Who is Evyatar? He comes, Evyatar is coming from the lineage of Itamar, and Eliezer and Sadok is coming from the lineage of Eliezer. Okay, and so we have these two sons of Aaron. Remember, 2 of them are killed. Okay, Nadav and Avihu. We were reigning with 2 sons of Aaron. Those 2 sons remaining are Eleazar and Itamar, and we find that the descendants of each of them share responsibilities during the time of King David. Okay, now it seems that Eli, and I'm trying to see where I saw this. I don't have this in front of me. Maybe you'll have to trust me, and if not, whatever. Eli, oh, I know where it is. Okay, Eli is a descendant of Itamar. Okay, Phinehas, a descendant of Eliezer. Okay, so we have a couple of things that we have to work out. So first of all, you may remember in the book of Numbers, after Phinehas killed those people that were sinning, one second. Find it. Okay. The beginning of this, there's a whole Torah portion, by the way, who's named after Phinehas. And in Numbers 25, okay, we have Phinehas taking an initiative. There are these 2 people that come before Moses, and they're sinning terribly, fornicating, whatever. And as a result, Phinehas immediately kills them. And in response to that, God says to Phinehas, and I'm now in Numbers chapter 25, verse 12. Say, therefore, I grant him my pact of friendship. He's talking about Phinehas. It shall be for him and his descendants after him a pact of priesthood for all time. because he took compassionate action for his God, thus making expiation for the Israelites. So here God promises to Phinehas that his descendants will be the priest, for, the main priest, the high priest or whatever for all time. Okay, that takes us to the people we're talking about now. That's Tzadok. Tzadok is a direct descendant of Phinehas, who is a direct descendant of Eliezer. Okay, that's Tzadok. So we think that Tzadok is going to have this forever. And yet, in our story here in the book of Samuel, we meet Eli, and Eli is not a descendant of Tzadok or of Phinehas. He is a descendant of Itamar. Okay, he is part of the same family that later will produce Evyatar. Okay, so I have to ask myself, why, if Phinehas was promised that he would be the main priest forever, why do we suddenly in our story have Eli be the main priest, and he's not from a descendant of Phinehas? He is a descendant of Eli. Now, I will prove that further to you because of what happens later on. Did I not write it? Okay. In 2 Samuel, there is, not 2 Samuel, in 1 Kings, when Solomon becomes king, he makes a number of changes in the kingdom. He changes all kinds of things. Some of the things David told him to do, and some of the things David didn't tell him to do. But one of the things he does is that he kicks out, and I want to see, because I see I didn't mark it here. He throws out Evyatar. Now remember, Evyatar was one of the priests who was with David. And Solomon throws him out. Here we go. It is 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 26. Okay? Chapter 2, verse 26. And I'll read this to you now. Okay? To the priest Evyatar, the king said, "Go to your estate at Anatot. You deserve to die, but I shall not put you to death at this time, because you carried the ark of my Lord God before my father David, and because you shared all the hardships my father endured." So Solomon dismissed Evyatar from his office of priest of the Lord, thus fulfilling what the Lord had spoken at Shiloh regarding the house of Eli. This is the main source that tells us that Abiatar is from the house of Eli. Okay. Okay, and he is from the lineage of Itamar. So we have basically, what do we have here? What picture do we have? A strange picture. On the one hand, God has promised to Phinehas that his descendants will priest forever, and then we have Eli, who's not a descendant of Phinehas at all. He's a descendant of Itamar. Then we have, during King David's time, we see priests from both of these lineages, from Eliezer and from Itamar, sharing the roles. We have Tzadok on the one hand, and we have Evyatar on the other hand, and they seem to be sharing. Then we have Solomon, who drives away Evyatar, sticks only with Tzadok and his descendants, okay? And what we learn from Solomon has his own reasons for sending away Evyatar. Solomon's reasons have to do with the degree of loyalty that he believes Evyatar has to him, and he thinks he is siding with the wrong side. So he wants to get rid of Evyatar for his own political reasons. But what Scripture tells us, that in so doing, he fulfills the original decree that God had made about the descendants of Eli. Okay? So the question is now, how come Eli was put in there in the first place? Because he's not a descendant of Phinehas. Now, Jewish tradition says as follows. We will remember what happened with that concubine from Gibeah, that horrible story that ends the book of Judges. Jewish tradition is that because of Phinehas's lack of involvement or misinvolvement, where he could have prevented this whole war and could prevented all these things from happening, and he did not. Therefore, he was punished, and temporarily the priesthood was removed from his descendants and given instead to the descendants of Itamar, which is how Eli becomes the high priest to begin with. Then we have this period of time where they share, and then finally, that only happens, the decree that God mentions against Eli only happens in Solomon's time. And I think this is a very, very interesting, it's a very interesting statement. And it reminds us in a way, great differences, of course. We just came out of this whole Gaza campaign, and there was, a response that there were missiles and all kinds of terrorism and stuff coming from Gaza to Israel, and so the government of the Israeli army decided to get rid of 5 different leaders of the terrorists, and then it created all this other stuff. And so there's been a lot of discussion in Israel. Should we be responding to every attack right away, or should we be waiting? And the prime minister always comes out and says as follows. He says, we keep an account, okay? We are not necessarily going to respond to every attack immediately, because sometimes for all kinds of other reasons, it is better for us to wait and respond at a time that's best for us. And I think of this situation here, and of course, we're talking about God and talking about something else, but clearly God takes into account all these different factors. When he says something is going to happen, it's definitely going to happen. But it may take generations until it actually takes place, because he has his own considerations that he's taking into account. What we do know, though, is after this point, after Solomon's time, when he gets rid of Eviatar, from then on in, we always hear that the priests are descendants of Zadok. Now, in Ezekiel chapter 43, he refers to the priests of the descendants of Zadok who are close to me. This is how God is referring to them. And I would go further to say, in the Second Temple, you are all familiar with the word Sadducees. Sadducees in Hebrew are Stukim. They were descendants of Zadok, because it was a priestly group that split off from the priests that were in the temple, although there were a lot of priests in the temple that remained loyal to the Sadducee group. I don't want to get into the horrible politics of Second Temple, but it's revealing that even hundreds of years later in the Second Temple, clearly the high priests remain from the descendants of Sadducees. Now, one of the places, though, that we see a little bit of just one more comment before we go back to our study of Samuel, okay, and that's in the book of Jeremiah. The very beginning of the book of Jeremiah, we learn as follows. The words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, one of the priests at Anatot in the territory of Benjamin. Who are the priests at Anatot? Well, we just read that. We just read that in with the story of Solomon. Where does he send Eviatar? He says, go to Anatot. So it clearly that Jeremiah himself is a descendant of Eli, a descendant of Itamar. He is amongst those priests that have been exiled from Jerusalem, from work in the temple, and he is in Anatot. In many ways, you can say that Jeremiah kind of brings us all full circle. Okay, while he is not a high priest, he is a priest. He's a descendant of Eli, and he, of course, is going to be the one that's going to change the legacy of the children of Eli. If the children of Eli end up being banished from the temple based upon these terrible sins that were perpetrated by the children of Eli, at the end, from that same lineage comes Jeremiah. What an amazing man of God, teacher and spreader of God's words, and we are still reading his messages to this very day. So even if you've got bad kids and your lineage is cursed in some way, it's not the end of the story, because the end of the story can always be a Jeremiah, and that really is something that should give us all courage. Okay, so I'd like to just go further. Chapters 5 and 6, okay, basically tell the story of the wanderings of the ark. We left the story back in chapter 3 when the ark, or chapter 4, when the ark is taken by the Philistines. And now we are moving, the scene moves to Philistine land. And we learn that there's some problems going on here, okay? The ark is in Dagon, and when it's in Dagon, all of a sudden, Dagon, of course, is this statue. It's one of their idols. It's a temple for Dagon that's located in Ashdod. And they come the next day, and the statue is crashed on the floor, okay? And the people in Ashdod say, oh my gosh, and then not only that, they have plagues and all kinds of terrible things. So finally, the people of the Philistines said, we got to get it out of Ashdod. So then they go and they try to send it somewhere else, and they send it to the Gat, and they send it to Ekron. These are all Philistine cities that are located near the coast, and every place the ark is, there's problems. There's plagues and whatever. And so finally, in chapter 6, the Philistines summon their priests, and it's very interesting. Their priests and their kosmim, it says diviners in English, it's their magicians. And that tells us something, okay? These are pagans, and pagans have a very magical way of looking at things, okay? How are they interpreting all of this? They're interpreting that the ark itself has magic powers. And therefore, wherever it is, it's not God doing things. It's like this magic effect of the ark that's creating havoc. So they keep thinking they move it to different places, but then every place it goes. And it's, in a way, God kind of plays along with their conception, okay? Because we know it's not magic. We know that it is God talking, but he's kind of playing along with their idea. And I think God is coming to it from a completely different place. He doesn't like the fact that the Philistines have taken the ark. It doesn't belong to them. It's not where it belongs. Okay. Anyway, at the end, what do these magicians say? Well, you can't just return the ark. You have to put it with all these gold and jewels and all kinds of things, and they put it all on the wagon with the cart, with the ark, and they put these two cows, and they say, okay, go. And they say, if they end up going to Judah, to Beit Shemesh, great. If they end up detouring somewhere else, they know that this is not where the ark is supposed to go. But of course, in the end, they go straight to Beit Shemesh, which is in Judah, which is a place that the Judeans are there. It's not run by the Philistines. And they put the ark there. But it's not the end of the problem, because the people of Beit Shemesh, they looked at the ark, they handled the ark, which of course they weren't supposed to do. The ark is supposed to be behind a screen in the Holy of Holies. It is not supposed to be accessible to ordinary people. And so they also suffer as a result. And at the end, and we see this at the beginning of chapter 7, they end up bringing it to Kiryat Yearim, and it will stay there. It's here for 20 years. We will not meet the ark again until King David decides to bring it up to Jerusalem. So the story ends here. It's going to be taken up later on. Okay. But one of the things that I find very interesting about this whole thing is this idea of the pagan regard for the ark. And if you think about it, this is exactly where, and I think we discussed this previously, this is exactly where Eli's sons, among other things, this is where they totally went wrong in taking the ark with them to battle. Because they had this idea that the ark itself is some fountain of magic or some such thing. And therefore, if the ark itself is in the midst of the battle, it will protect the Jewish people. They don't take into account that God is the judge here, and God doesn't work based on magic. And it doesn't matter where you put the ark. If the nation is supposed to win the war, they will win it. And if the nation is not supposed to win the war, they will not win it. And the whole disaster of the war basically proves that the ark is not a magic omen. And yet, as soon as the Philistines take it, they continue to treat it as this magic omen. You know, that, oh, this is their problem. And so they get rid of it. And as I said, God is kind of manipulating them, following them in their logic. But the nation of Israel is never supposed to treat the ark as a magic omen. Okay, it's not supposed to handle the ark. It's not supposed to see it, you know, and it's a whole different situation. Now, I was just in Shiloh yesterday, and I met a group there, and I did this teaching, and it reminded me this is something that I should just mention to you here as well. At the end of the story, the taking of the ark, there's no mention of what happens to the tabernacle. We don't know from the story. It doesn't say anything. However, in Jeremiah 7, we have an indication of what actually happened to the tabernacle. Jeremiah 7, verse 12, and this is, of course, in the context of Jeremiah rebuking the nation and telling them that the temple is not going to save them. They are convinced that so long as there's this temple standing in the middle of Jerusalem, they are protected because God will never destroy the temple. And the temple itself, in a magical kind of way, acts as this safeguard against anything bad happening. And Jeremiah is fighting against that conception. And he's saying to them, it's not about the temple, it's about your behavior. And don't think that just because you bring your sacrifices every day, that God will forgive you, because your sacrifices are not being brought from an honest repentance. If after you bring your sacrifices, you go back up and you continue to sin in the same ways. And this is Jeremiah's message to the nation over and over again. And in that context, when he's trying to tell the nation, get going because God's going to destroy this temple, this is what he says. Jeremiah 7, verse 12. Just go to my place at Shiloh, where I had established my name formerly, and see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel. And now, because you do all these things, declares the Lord, and though I spoke to you persistently, you would not listen. And though I called to you, you would not respond. Therefore, I will do to the house which bears my name, on which you rely, referring, of course, to the temple in Jerusalem, and to the place which I gave you and your fathers, just what I did to Shiloh. And I will cast you out of my presence as I cast out your brothers, the whole brood of Ephraim. So first of all, we learn from here, this is the source that tells us that the tabernacle at Shiloh was actually destroyed and burned to the ground. Because we know that the temple was destroyed and burned to the ground in Jeremiah's time. And Jeremiah prophesies that exactly what happened to Shiloh will happen to Jerusalem. So we can understand from that if the temple in Jerusalem was burnt and destroyed, then indeed the tabernacle and the city of Shiloh was burnt and destroyed as well. Okay, now let's see, what is the underlying meaning of this comparison between the destruction of Shiloh and the destruction of Jerusalem? And I think the kinds of things we've been talking about, the pagan view of what is the temple and what is the ark is what the two of them share. In the same way that the children of Eli took that ark into battle because it believed that there was some magic formula that would protect the nation just by the presence of the ark. And what we see is this kind of perverted view of the Philistines as well afterwards. And it's only after it comes to rest in Kiryat Yearim that things kind of calm down and we go back to the ark being where it belongs, okay, until eventually, of course, it is brought by King David to Jerusalem. Same here in the time of Jeremiah, the nation thinks they can that's another thing I wanted to point out. In these chapters that I just reviewed very quickly, when the Philistines are thinking, well, how do we bring back the ark? And they say, well, they have to put on gold and all kinds of things. What the rationale of these magicians and priests of the Philistines is that you have to basically bribe God. You've got to do some offerings. You've got to put gold in. In other words, they're coming from a very pagan view of God is to be bribed. And there's these magic formulas, which of course is an antithesis to a monotheistic way of belief that we share, those of us who read the Bible. And this is basically what Jeremiah is saying as well. Your sacrifices are not a magic formula. Don't think that because you come to the temple and you bring your sacrifice, that's it, you're fine. Or don't think that by bribing God with your sacrifice, you're going to solve your problem. Jeremiah says all over of so many places, God doesn't need your sacrifice. You're not bringing a sacrifice to give God, to bribe God. You're giving a sacrifice to express in some tangible way what should be your honest feeling of desire to become close to God and to repent your ways and change your ways. And so I think what Jeremiah is doing here in comparing this is not just giving us information of what happened to Shiloh, but he's telling us about the same sin, the same problem that affects the Israelite society in the time of Eli is affecting Israelite society in the time of Jeremiah. So with that, we have concluded our study. We have come through, we've gone through to the beginning of chapter 7. And we will take up with chapter 7 with Samuel calling to the house of Israel, and that becomes a whole new chapter, because from here on in, don't forget, there is no more Eli. Everything has changed, and from here on in, we see Samuel becoming the leader of Israel. Any questions?
No, except that's absolutely fantastic to connect that and all times. I'm just reminded of the other day when, I don't know who it was saying, all this problem in Israel with the two factions. Well, why can't we be like other nations? I thought, where have we heard that one before?
Well, that also is going to be a very interesting discussion when we go further on in the book of Samuel, and we talk about the nation asking for a king from Samuel. And that becomes also part of the discussion. What were they looking for? Because there's a point at which they're saying, we want to be like everybody else. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? So we're going to be taking that up as well.
I've got a question, please. Going back, you said Solomon sticks with Zadok and not Abiathar. And then you mentioned Phinehas didn't stop a war, so he was removed temporary. Where was that, please?
That's the very, very end of the book of Judges. Okay, we have this terrible, terrible story. It's Judges chapters, chapter 19 and 20. The last two chapters of Judges is this terrible, terrible story about the concubine from Gibeah. And as part of this, they go up, and it results in a civil war. And Phinehas is very much involved in this. And they go up to him and they say, what should we do? How should we fight? What should we do? And he's there. So we know he's present, but we know there's no attempt on his part to prevent this whole civil war from happening to begin with. He's the leader. He's the recognized religious leader. And so there is this interpretation that says, as a result of his inability or unwillingness, or even not even thinking, here's a problem in the nation, I need to prevent this disaster from being worse than it already is, that he was therefore removed temporarily from his job as the priesthood.
That was certainly very jam-packed.
Yes.
I can't wait to have it come so I can go through it again and pause and update my notes a bit.
Yeah, that is something that's worth doing for sure.
Sondra, it's Jane here. Could I ask you about a verse that's in Zechariah 13, verse 1?
Okay.
It talks about a fountain being opened for the house of David.
Where is Zechariah 13?
Yeah, verse 1.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that talks about cleansing from sin and impurity.
Right.
And from the idols as well. Does that have any relevance to where you've been studying today?
Well, look, there's a concept that we have already from starts in Exodus, where we are given this idea of a temple or a tabernacle. A tabernacle becomes a temple, a central place of worship. And starting with King David's time, it becomes understood that will be in Jerusalem, and Solomon builds the temple in Jerusalem. So there is this idea of coming to the temple in Jerusalem for purposes of purifying yourself and to repent your sins and all that. And that is part of the whole sacrifice system. Okay. So what this is talking about something, I don't know, I see this as kind of symbolic. That Zechariah is talking about a future time, okay? And here we have the house of David. This is way past David. We can even see it as something that has not happened yet, that we're waiting for. I think both Jews and Christians believe that Messiah is coming from the house of David. So perhaps this idea of a restoration of a house of David in a future time. And here it's talking about a cleansing that will happen to everybody, okay, from this fountain. But I don't know if it's necessarily a literal fountain as much as some kind of a cleansing, some kind of a purification that we all go back to go back to a different time, a time with prophets, a time with spiritual leaders, a time of Jerusalem being a religious capital, spiritual capital. And that's how I read it. So it's certainly rooted in this idea of Jerusalem and the temple being central to our worship, but exactly what this fountain is, and I don't know. That's just my interpretation.
Sondra,
Thank you.
just wanted to say thank you for laying out the lineage of Sodok, because as you know, we read it in the Haftorah a few weeks ago, and I needed to clarify, and you have done so for me.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Hey, Sondra,
Yes.
when you were reading on the names of my Bible was different. I don't know if
Yes.
anybody else was, like in First
Yes.
Chronicles.
Where are you reading from?
I think it was when you were in First Chronicles 6.
Okay, 1 second. Yeah.
Maybe I didn't.
34, 35.
Did anybody else have issues like the names were not even close to what you were saying?
Well, I didn't read all the names. In 35, we have
No, okay, so this is, I'm reading in verse 33. Sorry, 33. These are the men who served and their sons, and it's the sons of Samuel. The son of Joel, the son of
I don't have
Samuel,
that.
the son of Elkanah. And you were reading like the sons of Eli or something.
Wait, what
Like-
verse are you in?
Yeah.
I'm in like, so 33.
Of which
'Cause you
chapter?
started like it.
Chapter
This is in
6?
First Chronicles 6. Yeah. So I'm wondering, like,
Because
is this
there
like
is that the sons of Samuel are in 13.
well, so in my Bible, First Chronicles 6 says the son, like you said, it was the sons of who did you say?
But what's 13 for you? Look at First Chronicles 6, verse 13.
Verse 13. And I might have just gotten okay, so 13.
Mine says the same as you.
Shalom fathered Hilkiah. Hilkiah fathered Azariah.
Oh
Azariah
God, you have
fathered
very
Sariah.
different. I don't know where you are.
I know. That's why I was like so confused, and I'm like, maybe we need to like compare translations or something.
Well, number 12, First Chronicles 6:12 in my Bible says Ahitub, the father of Zadok, the father of Shallum, and then Shallum, the father of Hilkiah, the father of Azariah.
Yeah. Okay. And Zadok is like in verse 8
12.
in mine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's
You have verse
verse 8 in mine.
12
Here.
and you have verse 8. I don't have it
Maybe.
any of those
6.
places.
Oh yeah, no.
What is
12
the
is
chapter?
also
What
good.
is the chapter?
First
Chapter
Chronicles 6.
First
All right, so
Chronicles chapter.
Zadok is
actually,
in there a couple of times. Actually, it's in
Okay,
verse 8.
actually,
and it's in
when-
verse 12.
the verse 6, the chapter 6, I actually referred to this a couple weeks ago when I did a class on was Samuel a priest or a Levite,
Right.
and I used some of the stuff that was here when it talks about Samuel Elkanah. That was verse 19. So what does verse 19 say?
Verse 19.
The sons of
Elkanah.
Yeah, the sons of Merari.
Oh no, I've
Okay,
got
so who
sons
has-
of
All right, who has son of Elkanah, son of Yerucham? Who has that?
yeah,
What
I
is
do.
the chapter? What is the verse?
Not me.
Chapter 6, verse 19.
The sons of Merari,
Chapter 6,
Mali, and
verse
Mushi.
19.
Okay,
These are the
sons of
clans of the
Merari.
Levites according to their fathers.
Okay.
No,
Okay,
I've got
you
sons
have,
of-
okay, you have, Kim, you have for 19, you have sons of Merari, Machli and Mushi. These were the families of Levites according to their clans.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so that in my Bible is verse 4.
God.
Oh, how bizarre. So they've just like
It's just-
mishmashed it all
Yes,
It's
the
together.
same.
twisted.
That's
It's
mine
just-
is the same.
So look for the verse, okay, that is Aaron and his sons made offerings upon the altar of burnt offering and upon the altar of incense, performing all the tasks of the most holy place to make atonement for Israel according to all that Moses, the servant of God, had commanded. Okay, So it's gonna be after, I think, right?
Yeah, because the very first verse is like the sons of Levi, Gershon, blah, blah, blah.
Yes,
Yeah,
I've
that's
got that.
verse
Verse
one.
49. It's 49. Verse 49.
49, yeah.
But Aaron and his sons offered sacrifices.
So that's 49. So it's all 15 verses.
So I've got the
Out
children of
the
Israel gave the
top.
cities to the Levites with their open areas on 49.
So I go then on verse 38, so go, what's verse 50? What do you have as verse 50?
These were the descendants of Aaron,
you
Eleazar
go.
his son, Phinehas his son.
There you go. That's what I was
Abishua,
reading
his
from.
son.
That's what you were
Those were
reading.
the verses I was
Okay.
reading from.
Okay, because I was like, none of the names, and I'm like, what? What is she? Wait a minute. This is not matching up. So, okay. Wow.
That's why I
So
said we have to
totally
listen
different.
again.
I've
Great.
never, you know what? I have seen discrepancies of 1 or 2 verses. I have never
never
seen a
like this.
discrepancy of 15.
I
That's
have the
really
same
weird.
as you, Sondra. I've got the same as you. It's just weird.
What Bible do you have, Pauline?
A stone edition.
Well, that's why you have a Jewish Bible.
Yeah.
I
And
have
I'm
a
using
Jewish Bible too.
JPS.
Let's see what I've got.
Yeah, that
Maria,
also,
yours,
Maria, you
yours
also have a
should be
Jewish
the same
Bible.
as Sandra's.
Yes.
I've got the Jewish Bible, and in mine, it's the verse you're talking about as 49. In all this chapter, it says 34/49, and
There
all
you go.
of them.
So it's showing you the 2 different
Yeah.
versions in one.
Yeah.
Can we
Yeah.
finish?
Yeah,
Okay,
the-
well,
That makes more
That was-
sense than what I was reading. What you were reading, I was reading. I was like, wait a minute, this isn't matching.
okay, so now you have to go back and listen to it, the different text. But you see there's Tzadok.
Gosh, that's weird.
It is weird. All right, well, I guess we all learned something today.
I hope you enjoyed that film. And we have lots more film content and emails and articles that I'm sure you will enjoy as well. Check out our website at cfoic.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that right from the homepage. I know you will really enjoy the content that will land in your inbox on a regular basis. Hope to see you soon.